How does a beaten village boy become one of the most feared rulers of our time, and end his days pulled from a hole in the ground? On April 28, 1937, in a cluster of mud and straw houses near Tikrit, a child entered the world who would one day dominate headlines and haunt an entire region. Saddam Hussein. His family were poor villagers on the banks of the Tigris, scraping by on herding and farm work. On his right wrist, Saddam carried the traditional tribal tattoo of 3 dark blue dots, an early mark of belonging in a world where tribe meant survival. But the people of Halabja mostly knew hunger, hard labor, and loss. Saddam's father, a shepherd, vanished before the boy was even born. No one could say if he died, deserted, or simply disappeared. Months later, tragedy deepened when Saddam's 12-year-old brother died of cancer, leaving his mother, Subha, crushed by grief. Her despair grew so intense that she reportedly tried to kill herself and end the pregnancy. She failed, and the baby survived. She named him Saddam, in Arabic, the one who confronts, the stubborn one. It was less a name and more a prophecy. But Subha, now alone and destitute, could barely feed herself, let alone a newborn. She eventually sent the child to live with her brother, Ka'ar al-Talfa, a former army officer and ardent Arab nationalist in nearby Tikrit. For the first time, Saddam had a roof, some stability, and a man who believed he could be more than a hungry village boy. That fragile security didn't last. Talfa joined an attempted coup against Iraq's pro-British regime and landed in prison, leaving young Saddam once again without a protector. The boy was sent back to his mother, who had remarried a man the villagers nicknamed Hassan the Liar. The nickname wasn't the worst thing about him. In this new home, Saddam was beaten, humiliated, and used. Neighbors later recalled the stepfather shouting insults to wake him. "You son of a dog, I don't want you." He was kept from school and tasked instead with stealing livestock, goats, chickens, anything of value. If he was caught, some said he would rather kill the animals than give them back. What kind of adult grows out of this mixture of violence, poverty, and humiliation? At age 10, hearing that his uncle had finally been freed, Saddam ran away to Tikrit. Back under Talfa's roof, the tone of his life changed dramatically. His uncle filled his head with talk of Arab glory, of freeing the region from foreign control, of strong men who bent history to their will. He told this damaged boy that he was destined to lead Iraq one day. Then he handed him his first real treasure, a handgun. Saddam reportedly carried it everywhere. Teachers later said he used it to intimidate them. Some stories even claim he killed a man as a teenager, then slept with the warm pistol under his pillow until police arrived at the house. Whether every detail is true or not, one thing is clear. Violence had become a language he understood. Under his uncle's influence, Saddam finally learned to read and write at school. But he also absorbed a harsher curriculum: secret meetings, radical politics, and conspiracy. In 1957, around the age of 20, he left secondary school in Baghdad's Al-Khar district and joined the Arab Ba'ath Socialist Party as a street-level enforcer and gunman. The Ba'athists dreamed of uniting the Arab world under one banner. In Iraq, they were a small, underground movement, fiercely nationalist, opposed to Western influence, hostile to monarchs and communists alike. Saddam didn't enter as a thinker or diplomat. He came in as muscle. 2 years later, the party gave him his biggest mission yet. On October 7, 1959, the Ba'athists decided to remove Iraq's prime minister, Abdul Karim Qasim. The plan was simple in theory and horrific in practice. Ambush Qasim's car in Baghdad's busiest street, shoot everyone inside, and vanish into the chaos. Young Saddam played a central role. The team opened fire, killing the chauffeur and wounding Qasim, but the target survived with injuries to his arm and shoulder. Saddam himself was hit in the leg. Later propaganda portrayed him as a fearless hero who calmly dug the bullet out with a knife. Other accounts paint him as the one who fired too early and botched the attack. Either way, he escaped the fate that awaited many of his comrades. Several of the would-be assassins were captured, tried, and executed. Saddam slipped away, first to Syria, then to Egypt, where he enrolled in law studies in Cairo. In exile, he watched Iraq from afar. At home, Qasim was eventually removed by a military coup in 1963, briefly bringing the Ba'athists closer to power. Saddam hurried back, hoping to ride the new wave, but Iraqi politics were a maze of rival generals and factions. He soon found himself caught in another round of plotting. A new conspiracy formed within the party, aiming to oust the leadership. The plot was exposed, and Saddam became a wanted man. Forced into hiding, he was eventually captured in 1964 and sent to prison. Behind bars, he didn't fade. Instead, Saddam turned captivity into a classroom. He stayed active in party politics, reading obsessively about past dictators, Joseph Stalin, Adolf Hitler, and others who used fear and propaganda to control entire nations. He studied not just ideology, but methods, purges, secret police, personality cults. In 1966, sympathetic guards helped him escape. He went straight back to the Ba'ath network and quickly rose to the role of deputy secretary of the regional command, becoming one of the party's most ambitious operators. 2 years later, his patience and planning paid off. In 1968, a new coup toppled the government and installed the Ba'ath Party in power. Saddam's cousin, Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr, became president. Saddam, now a key ally, was appointed his deputy and head of the internal security apparatus, the shadowy machinery that watches, listens, and eliminates threats. He proved merciless but efficient. Inside government, he neutralized opponents by co-opting some and eliminating others. He wasn't yet the official leader, but he was the engine driving the regime. Before long, he was vice chairman of the Revolutionary Command Council, the small group that really held Iraq together. By the early 1970s, he effectively controlled the country in everything but title. Yet Saddam knew fear alone couldn't sustain his rule. People had to see tangible benefits. After the Baathists seized power, they were not universally beloved. That changed when Saddam pushed to nationalize Iraq's oil in the early 1970s, right before a global energy crisis sent prices soaring. Suddenly, the state was rich. Billions flowed into government coffers, and Saddam used that money to transform daily life for many Iraqis. Healthcare was expanded. Hospitals became free for citizens. Schools were improved and made accessible to all Iraqi children, boys and girls, with compulsory education through high school. Mass literacy campaigns and new infrastructure, roads, power plants, public works, sprang up across the country. Families of soldiers received full financial support. Many Iraqis saw their living standards rise sharply, and in the years before his wars, construction became a prized middle-class job. But there was another side to this prosperity. Roughly 40% of the oil windfall went to weapons purchases from both Western and Soviet suppliers. As Iraq modernized, it also armed itself to the teeth. By the late 1970s, one man stood at the center of this new, oil-rich state. In 1979, when al-Bakr moved toward uniting Iraq and Syria in a way that would diminish Saddam's personal authority, Saddam struck first. Under pressure, al-Bakr resigned, and on July 16, 1979, Saddam Hussein became president of Iraq. On paper, it was a smooth transfer of power. In reality, it was the beginning of a reign of terror. 5 days later, he convened a major Ba'ath Party assembly, around 250 officials in one hall. The mood was expectant but confused. Then Saddam announced he had uncovered a conspiracy against him. An alleged informant took the stage and read out 68 names. One by one, the men summoned were dragged from the room. They were tried, condemned for treason, and many were killed. 22 were sentenced to death. The entire spectacle was filmed and distributed across Iraq, a chilling theater of fear that made clear who now held power. Within months, he staged another grotesque display. Saddam accused a group of people, many of them from Iraq's tiny Jewish community, of being part of a foreign spy network. In a carnival-like public scene, they were hanged before a cheering crowd in downtown Baghdad. Their deaths turned into a national show. More alleged traitors would follow, some executed live on television, others left dangling from lampposts as a warning. Saddam packed the government and security services with relatives and loyal clansmen, backed by webs of informants. Even a joke about the leader could lead to torture or death. In his view, it was safer to kill a suspected opponent and be wrong than allow any risk to survive. And all the while, he was building an image as carefully as he built his prisons. He married his cousin Sajida, the daughter of his influential uncle Talfa. They had 5 children, 2 sons, Uday and Qusay, and 3 daughters, Raghad, Rana, and Hala. Later, he took lovers discreetly, but never flaunted them in public. As his sons grew, he handed them powerful roles inside the regime. Saddam's portrait was everywhere, posters, murals, statues. He dyed his hair jet black, groomed his mustache, and avoided wearing reading glasses on camera to appear strong and youthful. A slipped disc gave him a slight limp, so he was rarely filmed walking for long. Tailored suits hid his changing weight. He built around 20 lavish palaces, each fully staffed and kept ready as if he lived there every day. He rotated between them unpredictably and used body doubles to confuse enemies. His meals, sometimes featuring imported delicacies, were tested for poison and radiation. He privately enjoyed wine, but never in public, maintaining the illusion of strict religious piety. He obsessed over cleanliness. High-ranking generals invited to see him were forced to strip to their underwear while their clothes were inspected, cleaned, and even X-rayed. They'd wash their hands in disinfectant before entering. Even in later captivity, he was said to wipe down his utensils before eating. For all his power, Saddam's world had shrunk into a fortress of paranoia. And yet he still knew surprisingly little about the wider world. He had a narrow view of Western societies and their systems. At one point, he was reportedly stunned to learn that in the United States, ordinary citizens could publicly criticize their president without being jailed or killed. It was a concept foreign to his entire way of ruling. Then, in 1979, events across the border ignited his deepest fears. That year, Iran's revolution toppled the Shah and brought Ayatollah Khomeini to power. The new Iranian system was driven by Shia religious leadership. Saddam, whose regime depended heavily on Iraq's Sunni minority, worried that Tehran's revolution could spread across the border, stirring Iraq's Shia majority. His answer was not diplomacy. On September 22, 1980, he ordered Iraqi forces to cross the border and seize Iran's oil-rich Khuzestan region, a clear international violation. He believed the clash would last weeks. Instead, he walked Iraq into an 8-year bloodbath. Saddam had no real battlefield experience. He underestimated Iran's size, resilience, and willingness to sacrifice. What followed was a grinding trench war, with horrific losses on both sides. As the dead piled up, he poured money into advanced weapons, including nuclear ambitions. By 1981, Israel, believing he would use an atomic bomb if he obtained one, launched a surprise airstrike that destroyed Iraq's nuclear reactor at Osirak just before it became operational. It was a humiliating setback. With no clear victory in sight, Saddam called a cabinet meeting. When his health minister suggested that Saddam step down to secure peace, the reaction was brutal. The man was arrested on the spot. His wife begged for mercy, and Saddam promised he would release him. The next day, the minister came home in a body bag, mutilated beyond recognition. As the war dragged toward its end, Saddam's violence escalated further. In one of his most infamous crimes, he authorized chemical attacks against Kurdish civilians in the north. In the town of Halabja, thousands died, choking on toxic gases in their own streets and homes. Many more were injured, and the long-term health consequences, cancers, birth defects, chronic illnesses, still haunt the region decades later. By the time a ceasefire was finally signed in August 1988, both Iran and Iraq had lost around 500,000 people each. Iraq's economy lay shattered. 1 million soldiers returned to a country drowning in debt and struggling to rebuild. Saddam needed cash fast. His eyes turned south. At the end of the 1980s, he fixated on Iraq's neighbor, Kuwait, a small, oil-rich monarchy. He believed Kuwait was hoarding vast wealth abroad while Iraq suffocated under war debts. He also claimed, historically, that Kuwait had once been part of Iraq, justifying annexation as a correction. On August 2, 1990, Iraqi forces stormed Kuwait. Within hours, they controlled the country. The world reacted with outrage. The UN imposed sanctions and set a deadline: leave Kuwait by January 15, 1991, or face a military response. During the occupation, Saddam staged bizarre televised interviews with Kuwaiti citizens, asking if they welcomed the invasion. Of course they said yes. The cameras and soldiers made sure of that. When he ignored the UN deadline, a US-led coalition launched a massive campaign. Iraq's army was no match for high-tech air power and coordinated ground assaults. Within 6 weeks, Iraqi forces were driven out of Kuwait. A ceasefire required Iraq to dismantle its chemical and biological weapons programs. International sanctions stayed in place, crippling the economy. Still, Saddam claimed victory. He branded the conflict the mother of all battles, and insisted Iraq had stood firm against a criminal gang led by the United States. He declared that his country had punched a hole in the myth of Western invincibility, words that played well on state television but couldn't hide the ruins on the ground. Inside Iraq, Shia and Kurdish uprisings flared in the early 1990s. But the world, wary of another full-scale war, gave limited support. Saddam's forces crushed the rebellions with brutal force. Weapons inspectors from the United Nations combed the country, dismantling missiles, chemical stockpiles, and a super gun capable of long-range attacks. They also warned that Iraq still seemed interested in nuclear capabilities, even as sanctions bit deeper into ordinary people's lives. Despite the economic collapse, Saddam's personal lifestyle remained lavish. He and his family siphoned money from oil sales and diverted medical supplies meant for the public, selling them illegally. While Iraqi children suffered under shortages, his palaces glowed at night. Then came September 11, 2001. In the United States, President George W. Bush and his administration increasingly painted Saddam's government as part of a broader axis of evil, alleging ties to extremist groups and hidden weapons of mass destruction. UN inspectors returned in late 2002, searching suspected sites. They reported destroying what they found, but uncovered no active large-scale WMD program. Nonetheless, the drumbeat for war grew. On March 20, 2003, a new US-led coalition invaded Iraq, arguing that Saddam posed an imminent threat. Within weeks, his military structure collapsed, and on April 9, Baghdad fell. Statues of Saddam were toppled, his images torn down, but the man himself was gone. As coalition troops scoured the country, Saddam released audio messages, urging Iraqis to resist the occupiers and presenting himself as still in charge. For months, he remained invisible, until December 13, 2003. Near his hometown of Tikrit in the rural area of Ad-Dawar, U.S. forces found him hiding in a concealed underground space near a farmhouse. The once sharply groomed leader emerged with a long beard, disoriented, his power gone. He was transferred to a U.S. base, then formally handed to Iraq's interim government in June 2004 to face trial on charges of crimes against humanity. Even with his fate sealed, Saddam refused to accept responsibility. When questioned about mass killings, he blamed others. He insisted a notorious gas attack was carried out by his enemies. He claimed Kuwait was rightfully Iraqi. He said mass graves contained cowards and criminals, not victims of his purges. He argued that Iraq required a harsh ruler and that he had simply been firm. During his trial, he was defiant, arguing with judges, denouncing the court, delivering speeches instead of answers. On November 5, 2006, he was convicted and sentenced to death. Appeals failed. On December 30, 2006, at a military facility in Baghdad, Saddam Hussein was executed by hanging. The next day, he was buried near his birthplace, Halabja, closing the story of a man who shaped and shattered millions of lives. But did his death truly close the wounds he helped open? Saddam Hussein's life forces us to confront a disturbing paradox. He built schools and hospitals, then filled mass graves. He boosted literacy, then silenced writers and thinkers. He modernized infrastructure, then plunged his nation into catastrophic wars. He turned a childhood of humiliation into an empire of fear. A wounded child can become a healer or a tyrant. In Saddam's case, the boy who was once beaten and told he was unwanted chose to become the man everyone feared. His story raises a chilling question. How many lives would have been spared if one life had taken a different path? If this deep dive gave you a clearer picture of how one man's choices can scar an entire nation, take a moment to support the work we do here. Please hit like, and if you want more thoughtful explorations of power, history, and the human psyche, subscribe to Winds of Thought. Tell us in the comments, which moment in Saddam's rise or fall struck you the hardest, and why? History doesn't just remember what we build, but what we destroy. This has been Winds of Thought. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.